From MZ Studios in Dallas, Texas, you're listening to the Tennis Revolution podcast.
Bianca Andreescu. Welcome back to the Tennis Revolution podcast. I know you guys love when you're hearing a different voice. Coach is out today partying on spring break or St. Patrick's Day, something like that. So you're stuck with me talking about Indian Wells. We couldn't let you guys get by without hearing us on the final day of Indian Wells. The main reason I started the show with that name is because I think it's going to be a name you're going to be hearing quite a bit in women's tennis for a long time. Nothing to do with the fact that Federer and team are still playing as I record this, but no, she was incredible. Looking through the draw at all her results, obviously she started as an unseeded player and so she didn't have much fanfare to start with, but she beat Begu in 3 sets, so she lost the first set in her first match of the tournament. And then she had a great win, pretty easy routine win against Cibulkova, and another win against Voegeli, who certainly her probably least known opponent. And I mean, she was just rolling. We started to hear more. Then she beat Wang, who was the 18 seed, again in straight sets. So she, at that point, had won 6 straight sets. And then she's in the quarterfinals. You're thinking, okay, this was, a little bit of a fluke. She's, had a favorable draw to the first round. And this was the first match that I got to see her play. And against, Garbiñe Muguruza, a Grand Slam champion, she wins the first 9 games. So she's up 6-0, 3-0, which happened to be the time I turned it on. And she lost 1 game. So to a top 20 player in the world, she lost 1 game, 6-0, 6-1. And at that point, I mean, we had some great tennis on the women's side. And, I bet if you ranked the 8 players that were left at that time, she would probably have been number 8 in your prediction. We had Bencic, Pliskova, Venus and Kerber, and then Muguruza, and you had Svitolina and Vondrousova. So it would have been between her and Vondrousova as the two, that would have been the least probable winners at that point. And anyway, she beats her so badly. And, so many of the players we've seen over the years, they get a great win like that, a dominant win over a big-name player, and they fold the next round. Well, she had a marathon match the next round against Svitolina. Again, now we're talking about a top 10 player in the world. Wins the first set, loses the second, wins 6-4 in the third. And aside from the fact that Svitolina has had kind of I'm not going to say she's underachieving because she's 6th in the world, but she's had a tough time closing out in those matches, where it matters. And so we kind of saw a little bit of that here where, she had an opportunity to win, got it back to even, and then just lost it in the third, which seems to be how most of her tournaments end. She makes them work, drives them to the end, but can't quite cross the finish line. But then you're thinking, okay, Andreescu's beaten Svitolina, really long match. Kerber won pretty easily in the semis before, so she had more rest time and a shorter match. And so you're thinking, okay, in the final, their first Masters final, she's going to be super nervous, going to have a hard time. And again, she wins the first set, loses the second, and just battles all the way to the end. 6-4 in the third against Kerber. And Kerber, watching that match, Kerber is always going to make you hit a ton of balls. And that's typically where the lower players or even the younger players will eventually wilt or get impatient, and she was just able to hold it together, the entire time, and it's pretty crazy. I'm looking at the stats from that match, and their points played were very close, but she just was able to win, the crucial points. She's a pretty dominant server for that age, and she actually only had 54% of her first serves in, and still she won more points on her second serve than she did on her first, which kind of tells you that once the rally got going, that totally favored her, which is pretty crazy considering Kerber is just known for her long rallies. So it was a knockdown, drag out, as coach would say, and we got something we wanted. She came into this tournament ranked 60 in the world, so again, not somebody. At 18, to be 60 in the world is pretty impressive because that means you're obviously on the rise. But I don't think anybody expected these kind of results yet from her. And now we have to address what I want to focus on today on the show is the complete, not to bring, I feel like that's what we do on this show, but I'm going to do it now anyway, not to bring the show down, but I feel like we have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the complete failure of American tennis. I mean, this is by far the primary, American tournament outside of the U.S. Open. So you're talking about, you had a women's quarterfinal with 1 American. You had a men's quarterfinal with 0 Americans. Let me see if we had any in the round of 16. But we had 1 player for the men in the round of 16. And it's just kind of it's kind of depressing because we're used to seeing a few players sneak through, get in the later in the tournament and make people work. So we had 1 woman and 1 man out of the final 32 players. And by the way, both of them are 30 plus, and Venus especially, certainly on the downhill slide of their career. So I think that, if something doesn't happen differently in Miami, I think we really have to look at the American game as a failure right now. We've gotten by with talking about how the men's game, is weaker, but we've always had the women, the Sloane, the Keys, the next batch of players, and the Williams sisters have always been there. But, I think we're really starting to reach I don't know what term I'm looking for, but a danger zone in terms of, Americans dominating the sport of tennis. I mean, it's gotten to be pretty crazy that on our home tournament, hard courts, which is our best surface, that we can't have a player in the quarters in the men's, or, anybody under 35 in the quarters in the women's, or the round of 16 even. And I think, I'm glad Coach isn't here to argue this with me, but I really think that if you watch American players, and this is obviously a generalization, but they are not willing to rally, and construct points. They just are not willing to do that. It's big serve or big forehand, and that's the way they win. And that's not the players that have done well in the last 10 years. I mean, you've got some of those players that do well, but the consistent players that are doing well are the ones that are able to dictate the play from the baseline, rally as long as they need to until they get an opening, and they're also great, defensive players. You cannot tell me a player that's in the top that is not a good defensive player. I mean, Kvitova maybe isn't. Osaka is much more offensive than defensive. But, I mean, you've got Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, incredible defensive players, obviously, offensive and defensive. But I would honestly say Djokovic, Nadal, and Murray are more defensive than offensive. And Federer is certainly an offensive player, but he does have the ability when he wants to hang back and rally for 10, 12 shots, with no problem. And I don't see our players from America willing to do that. And I don't know if it's funny because you watch junior tennis in America, as many of you have with your kids, or even, if you played, that's what tennis typically is. It's long baseline rallies until someone makes a mistake. So I know that our players had to play that way at some point. I mean, they didn't have dominant serves at 12 years old, or, huge forehands. I mean, so they have to have that gear somewhere. But I just watch and I consistently see the players that are doing well out-rally the Americans, and we don't make adjustments, and they can just keep the ball deep and wait for us to make a mistake. So it's Venus and Serena certainly will rally, and as they've gotten older, they've tried to shorten the points more, but they've always been aggressive baseliners, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, moonballs or grinding. I'm talking about the ability to control the points from the baseline, but not pull the trigger on the second or third ball every time. And I feel like we certainly have so many of those players now. I mean, Isner, Opelka, Stevens, Keys. Stevens can rally, if she's in that mode, but she pulls the trigger too early. So it's just it's frustrating to see that game kind of going. And you saw it again. You saw it in the names of the players that did well in this tournament. Focus on the women's side. I mean, Kerber, one of the best defensive players on the tour. Svitolina can rally all day. That's the way that the game is going. Bencic, super consistent from the baseline. Pliskova is more of a power player, but she lost in the quarters. So it's just, you're going to have Kerber, obviously, Bencic, Kerber, Andreescu, Svitolina. I mean, all those players can rally from the baseline when they need to. So it just frustrates me to watch because to me, I've played many players, and again, Coach isn't here to chastise me, but I have played many players in my life, and the first thing that I try to figure out in the context of the match is can I outlast this person in the rally? And the term, that the tennis community uses is shot tolerance. Do I have a higher shot tolerance than my opponent? And I feel like that almost everyone, all the top players, must go into a match with an American player and think, yes, I have a higher shot tolerance. And so then anytime they're in trouble, they can just keep the ball deep and wait for an error. And it just it kind of drives me crazy that strategy works against us almost across the board. I mean, you can't tell me that when someone plays Isner, they don't have a goal of get 3 balls back. And even Tiafoe, who's a baseline player, he's much more of aggressive. He's going to litter up the stat sheet, winners and errors. And those just aren't the players that win. They honestly, you look at the Grand Slam winners again, it's people that are super, super consistent baseline, with the exception of Federer again, who was at one time super consistent baseline, but he was able to control the points from the baseline. We have some of our players can control the points from the baseline, but they don't know what to do when they're not in control. And so, that's something we'll circle back on next week, but it really is depressing that Canada has better prospects at this point in tennis than America does. And I don't say that as a slight to Canada, but we've got a country with a much lower population, a much worse climate for tennis, much fewer facilities for tennis. And they've got, right now 3 great prospects under 21 that could easily be top 10 players. Andreescu, Felix Auger-Aliassime, who I think is the real deal, and then Shapovalov, who, he's already top 25, I believe, pretty close. So I think those, just with those 3 players, they already have something to look forward to for the next 10 years. And what do we have to look forward to? Isner's gone. Querrey's gone. Serena and Venus are gone. It just, I think we're reaching an exciting time in tennis with the young up-and-coming players sort of starting to take the reins, but none of them are American. That's the problem. The only one I can think about being excited about was Anisimova, but we really have no idea if that's a trend, her performance in the Australian, or if that's something that will carry over to more tournaments. I don't think she's become fully pro yet and doesn't have a ranking high enough to get in all these tournaments. So, it's going to take longer for her. I believe she's only 16, maybe 17 recently. But I can't name any other player that I'm super excited about. I think, we have some players with potential to be top 25, top 20, maybe sneak into the top 10 somehow, but I don't think there's anybody right now that you can look at and say, man, he's going to be competing for Grand Slams in a couple years. Whereas I could easily see Felix, Shapovalov, Andreescu competing for slams. And when I say competing, I mean making the quarters. That's kind of what the barometer is. If you're in the quarters, you got a chance to win. As we saw with Andreescu, she made the quarters. She was probably number 8 or 7 in our, who would have thought had won at that point, but then she won. So that once you're in the quarters, you got a shot. Because anybody can have a good day or off day or whatever. But for us to have, again, 0 players in the quarters is pretty crazy. And this is a side note because, as Coach would say, nobody cares about doubles, but we couldn't even we had zero women in the doubles semifinals. Again, we had 0 women. We had 1 team in the women's quarterfinals, and they got smoked. So, if we can't win on hard court, on our home tournament, then when are we going to shine? We had 0 American men in the doubles quarterfinal. So, it's terrible. And that's with the Americans getting all the wild cards, by the way. The Americans get the vast majority of wild cards when you play on a tournament in home soil. And yeah, we have the Bryans, but I don't know if you know this, but they're not going to be around much longer. They're a great team. We saw some incredible points from them. But I think we've got to stop hanging our hat on those players. And, Venus has had a great year so far, but I think we all know, even her, that her days are numbered. She's probably holding out like a lot of people think Federer is for the Olympics next year. But at this point, anything she wins is just a bonus on top of her career, or anytime she goes deep in a tournament, that's a bonus. But to expect her to win 6 matches or 7 matches is pretty far-fetched at this point. So, yeah, it was exciting to see new players do well, but it was also, in a bigger picture, depressing to me that that we had such little success at our home tournament. And again, I have numerous friends, clients that went to the tournament. And yeah, you go to see the big name players, but you also want to see up-and-coming players, preferably Americans, because you want to have somebody to look forward to watching for the next several years. And it was just rough. And even more depressing than the lack of success is just the style of play that our players are playing. That's to me, the primary issue that I'm having is that I don't want to watch a serve that's not returned, or, a blistering forehand return and then they barely get it back and I blister a second one. I want to see point construction, strategy, rallies, some breaking serve, which our Americans are horrible at also. So it's just it's not the tennis that we're used to here, and I think that that's what bothers me the most. And I worry that the players that play here are going to look up to those American players, that play that way, and think, okay, well, this is the way we should play. And obviously, people here are teaching that way, but I just think that that's not the game that we're at anymore. And it, I hope we'll turn around. I'm not going to say the sky is falling after one tournament with Miami coming up. We're going to have, tons of Americans in the draw again. So I think that we will have some success there. Somebody surely can break into the quarters at least. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of just crazy to look at a draw in tennis and see no Americans. I mean, they're having similar things in golf too. But in golf, it's a little different because all the big tournaments are here, and for the most part, most of the big tournaments, and so they're always going to have American players that are performing at a high level. But tennis to me, it's pretty sad. I mean, we've had one guy in the top 10 forever, and he's lingered in the 8 to 12 spot, and nobody wants to watch him. Nobody cares to watch him. Nobody cares how he does. In some ways, I think they probably root for him to lose, so they don't have to watch him again. And it's just it's embarrassing. But we will get more uplifting on the second half. I'm going to talk about what I think is the inevitable outcome. I'm not even going to guess that this happened, or that this. I'm not even going to wait for the outcome here, because I think it's a foregone conclusion that Federer is going to take out Thiem for his 101st title. And Federer's already up a break in the first set, so I think I feel pretty good about that prediction. And I'll talk more about the men's tournament when we come back.
It's time to join the revolution. Go to our website, tennisrevolutionpodcast.com, to get the latest episodes, email us your questions and comments, or give us show ideas.
Welcome back to the Tennis Revolution podcast. Well, promptly after I recorded that segment, of course, Federer lost his serve, so he's down 3-4, or he's up 4-3 in the first set. But I will hold on to my prediction, knowing this is going to our millions of fans, that he's going to close it out, probably in straight sets. But anyway, we had a lot to talk about in this men's draw. I have to say, it was the structure of this tournament doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. It's a 128 draw, but there's buys, so that basically means it takes 13 days, but they play it in 12 days. So somehow you get to the Friday of the tournament, of the last weekend, and they have to play 3 days in a row, which makes absolutely zero sense in a 13-day tournament, 12-day tournament, why you'd ever have to play 3 days in a row. But anyway, that's the way they do it. And, kind of just looking early in the tournament, we had some interesting results. The first thing I think we talked about that we were really excited to see, and maybe it had already happened before we recorded last, but of course we really wanted to see Djokovic and Kyrgios in the second round, and of course our favorite player quickly squelched that idea by losing first round to Kohlschreiber, and so that took that out. And then Kohlschreiber pulls, I don't know if I could say it's the upset of the year, but I probably would have to. The upset of the year by beating Djokovic pretty routinely also. So that kind of immediately put the tournament into turmoil. And it's funny, I feel like historically, almost any time that's happened, you immediately see the other members of the big three accelerate. Like, they might be kind of slogging around in the beginning. All of them are kind of, maybe lose a set, maybe, play some tough matches. But then once one of them is out, especially if it's the 1 seed, it's like the others just turn it on. And I feel like that's what happened with Nadal. He just turned it on after that. He beat Schwartzman 3-1, the same round that Djokovic lost. And of course he was already at that point kind of flying through the draw because he crushed Donaldson. But he beat Krajinovic, 3-4. So he didn't drop a set. He beat Khachanov 6-6, which was a tough match, which is the match he actually hurt his knee. But I don't think he or Federer lost a set after Djokovic went out. So it kind of just is. That's why nobody's been able to break through, because it doesn't matter when one of the big four loses or even two of the big four loses, but you still got the other two that just dominate. So we had getting a little later in the tournament, we had some Kohlschreiber just gets crushed after beating Djokovic, which again didn't surprise me. Number one, Monfils had a 13-2 record going in that match against him, and also he just beat the number one player in the world. So it's like, what more is there to do after that? So he crushes him, and Raonic just kind of rolled along. Federer was rolling along. It was kind of a blast from the past, because it was really all the players that were kind of in the top 10 5 or 6 years ago, with the exception of Thiem. You had Raonic, Federer, Nadal, all kind of rolling in there. But then you had what we always kind of look for, which is those young up and coming players playing those big names. So I'm going to fast forward to the quarters here, which is probably about where we left off in our last show. Well, we were looking forward to Thiem and Monfils. That was the first quarter that was so exciting, and Monfils withdraws. I don't expect this to apply at the Pro Tour, but this was always kind of a rule in tennis that if you knew that you couldn't play your next match, for whatever reason, you had to go out of town, you had a tournament, injured, the proper thing to do is you get to match point. So let's say you're up 6-4, 5-4, 40-30, and you walk up to the net and default the match. Now, again, did Monfils know when he walked up the court of the previous match that he wasn't going to be able to play against Thiem? I don't know. And would you expect any pro to forfeit, $300,000, $400,000 prize money? Of course not. So I'm not saying that should have happened, but it totally rubs me the wrong way when that does happen, when there's a walkover, and obviously you know where I'm getting at later in the tournament, but there's a walkover when the match isn't even attempted. And I find it a little bit hard to believe you were good enough to win a match in the previous round, and you weren't good enough to even step on the court for the next round. That, to me, is the part that I don't like. And they're world-class athletes. They, injuries happen. I'm sure he could have been injured stretching that night or working out the next morning, whatever. I think that's certainly a valid possibility. But to me, it's really a disservice to everyone. And, of course, he could go on the court and suffer through 3 games and get down 3-0 and then retire, and would that be any better? No, of course not. So, there's no solution to that problem, but it's just an annoyance. And so there was that kind of put that day on a sour note. But you had Raonic playing Kecmanovic, who, nobody knows who that is. And then you had Federer playing Hercox, who has kind of come out of nowhere the last couple of weeks. And he's, really challenged some play. He beat Shapovalov, and he's beaten some players. So, push Federer to 4-4. And then we had the match I was the most excited about in that round, which was Khachanov and Nadal, because I know that Khachanov, and by the way, I was hoping it was Isner Nadal, because I know Nadal doesn't like to play him. But Khachanov and Nadal, that's the exact kind of player that Nadal has had trouble with, especially on hard courts or grass courts. It was a hard, flat hitter, big server. That I knew that was going to be a tough match. And Nadal, despite obvious knee pain, medical timeouts, he was able to make it through 6-6, which, of course, what we were all waiting for, number 39, because we haven't seen it enough times. We've seen it 38, but for some reason that's not enough. And I'm not going to lie, I was excited about it too, so I'm totally fronting right now by acting like I wasn't. But number 39, Federer versus Nadal. And again, no day in between for some unknown reason. We're going to play 3 days in a row. And about an hour before they were supposed to play, another big issue I had, Nadal withdrawals. And so again, there's no solution to that. You could have put Khachanov in his place But then what do you do if Khachanov wins? I mean, he lost a match in the tournament, so that's not really, like, he doesn't deserve to advance, but the tournament itself did a great job. I think they put an exhibition on with Sampras and Djokovic and McEnroe and someone else, but that's cool. And the tournament has to do something like that. That was my main disappointment with our local tournament. We had a couple nights where there were some defaults and walkovers, and they didn't really provide adequate replacement entertainment. But yeah, so Team wins an absolute battle with Raonic, and that was an incredible match. They just battled all the way through. One break, which was in the third set, and Team served at 5-4, was pretty shaky closing it out, but then he finally did. And so it was 2 hours and 31 minutes. That was my primary reason for picking Federer, besides the fact that he's better than Team. That plus the fact that Federer didn't play, so you had 2.5 hours versus 0. And then also, Federer typically doesn't lose to players that play that style. He one-handed backhand versus one-handed backhand. I can't think of many times he's lost to a one-hander. Just not really his MO. So again, that's certainly not. I would rather see Federer and Team than Raonic and Federer, but and Team is proving himself as not just a clay court player. He made deep in the U.S. Open against Nadal. So I think he is finally sort of, broadened his game, but I just don't think he's quite ready for Federer. Federer in the final is a different animal. And Federer has the ability to take, the rally ball away from Team. He's not going to let him, run him ragged like he did to Raonic for a lot of that match. So yeah, that's how we got there. We almost had, the ideal, outcome that we'd like. We had some young up and comers that had a chance to go to the end and play Federer, and that was, what we looked for. Or, I mean, even if it was Nadal that made the final or whoever it was, we had a few of those up and comers, and even Monfils. I think we all would love to see Monfils win a slam. We'd love to see Berdych win a slam. Okay, maybe not Berdych, but that type with Nishikori, we'd love to see him win a slam. Del Potro, we'd like to see him win another one. I think that's kind of even if it's not a slam, it's one of these big tournaments. So I would have loved to see Monfils Federer. I'm okay with seeing Team Federer because Team hasn't won a Masters on hard court, so it's a little bit different matchup. I was actually happy that Federer and Nadal were in the same half because I didn't want to see a Federer Nadal final, just because we've seen that movie before. So overall, I think it was a great tournament, and once again, they were able to do what no other tournament over the course of the year, including Grand Slams, is able to do, which is make the doubles entertaining. They were able to, get the doubles, the big name players to play doubles, and in turn, we're able to generate the crowds and the visibility and that kind of thing. So. Federer just takes the first set, so my prediction is back alive. But that's got to be the model that the other tournaments use. But I think the biggest obstacle to that is this tournament can do it because it's a 12-day tournament or 13-day tournament. So you have that option to have a day off, a day in between. To ask guys to play singles and doubles and probably play 9 matches over the course of 6 days, that's just not realistic. And the top players are never going to do that because, number one, the doubles prize money is so low. Number two, they're not as good at doubles, so they're risking their reputation as an amazing player, which we saw from Djokovic, who was atrocious in the third set tiebreak that he lost with Fognini. I don't see it ever happening, but I think that the 12-day format does make it more plausible. And so we got to see that. We got to see the Bryans, and we got to see those. We didn't see as many of the big names as we usually do in doubles, but we got to see Djokovic. We've seen Nadal and Federer previous years of this tournament. But yeah, it's just a good, well-rounded tournament. I feel like there's always tennis on through the course of the whole 2 weeks that you actually care about. And I think that's where the other tournaments are lacking. I don't want to watch the men's doubles final typically, or the women's doubles final, but in this tournament, there's a good chance that I'm going to get somebody I've heard of or a star player out there late in the tournament, even if it's not the finals, maybe the semis. But anyway, I want to fast forward a little bit to Miami and tell you guys, and call in. I had to use that line because Coach isn't here, but call in, tell me what you think about how Miami's shaping up. It'll be interesting to see if Federer can bounce back like he used to and just play these back-to-back things. He did it 2 years ago, won both and beat Nadal in both tournaments. So it'll be interesting to see, because I think Djokovic is going to come back with a vengeance. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, like Djokovic is going to win everything. He's going to win the whole calendar slam and every match he ever played. But I think that he will be very motivated by that loss, and he'll be the freshest. Nadal is certainly not fresh. Federer can't be fresh. I mean, Federer didn't have any long, grueling matches, barring what happens in the final, but Djokovic is certainly the freshest of all the top players. He's got a good history in Miami, a little hotter, a little more humid, maybe favors the way he plays. And so I think that after that tournament, we will still see him as the favorite the rest of the year going forward. Now, if he flames that early again, then I think there's going to be some serious questions coming up of what's wrong with Djokovic. Why is he, where's his game? And I don't think we need to have that conversation now after one tournament. I think that is just a bad day. He had a lot of time off, a little rusty, didn't play well that day. I think that just is going to happen to every player. But I think, to me, this is where somebody like Andreescu, for me to believe that she's the next big thing, she has to make the quarters. If she makes the quarters, I'm good. Or if she runs up against a big seed early on and just battles till the end and loses 7-5 in the third, I'm okay with that too, because she won't be seeded, I don't think. She could be, actually, but either way, she won't be a top seed, so she could play a big name early. But that, to me, is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for Osaka to bounce back. I'm looking for, to see if Serena comes back. I think Nadal, to see where he is. To me, there's way more interesting storylines going into Miami than there were going into Indian Wells. So I think Sharapova and Del Potro may be back. So there's a lot of reasons. And Miami, to me, is sometimes a forgotten tournament, because here in DFW area, we have so much free time when Indian Wells is on because it's spring break. So there's a lot of downtime to watch tennis on TV. And I feel like once we get back to this next week, we're back to the doldrums of work and school and our lives. And tennis is it sometimes takes a back seat. Never a back seat for me, but for the rest of the world who doesn't do it for a living, they don't have time to watch 6 hours of tennis a day. They may catch one match in the evening or something. And also just the inevitable burnout of watching so much tennis this previous week. So I think that it sometimes gets forgotten, even by me, I admit it. And so that's why I said earlier that to me the Indian Wells is the most prestigious American tournament besides the U.S. Open, because that's when the most eyes are on you, and then they get a huge attendance there too. So everybody's seeing you, and to me that's the one that matters more. And then if people could come in and do well at Miami, that's great too. I also feel like Miami doesn't really springboard you to anything, because then we immediately go to clay. So it's like, yeah, you just won. Like if Andreescu won Miami, not Indian Wells, but Miami instead, I'm not really seeing that springboard into something, because then you're going to a completely different surface, continent, everything. So like that, whereas you win Indian Wells, that should springboard you to Miami. So you could easily have, two big, if you make two semis or a win in a semi, I mean, that's a crazy amount of points. Your ranking's going to go up, 30, 40, 50% just from those two events. So that's why I don't get too excited about Miami as Indian Wells. But this year's different. I've got a lot of players that I want to see how they bounce back. I want to see how they follow up. I want to see how Tsitsipas, comes back after an early exit, and surely some American will pick it up. I'm going to say we're going to have an American in the men's and women's quarters. So at least one in each. I'm going to make that prediction. And again, thinking about that as I say it, the men's, that's a harder sell. I mean, I almost have to hope for Isner, because anybody else is going to have to pull some upsets to get there. But, I think I'm still going to go with it, just because I think that home court advantage has to mean something. And just the surface too, the familiar surface. But anyway, yeah, that is to me the kind of storylines going into Miami. I want to see. To me, it's the bounce back and the follow through. Follow through meaning who that did well in Indian Wells can carry it over, and that's typically the best players. Because no offense to Andreescu, but anybody can win a tournament. It doesn't seem that way in the men's, because we've had the same four winners for 15 years. But if you look at, I think there was a stat this week that we've had 30 different winners between the men's and the women's tour, and I think Andreescu is certainly a different winner. If Federer wins this, that streak will be broken because he won Rotterdam, or Dubai. But if Thiem were to win, I think that would keep that streak going, which would be they said it was like the longest ever into a season that had happened for a pretty long time. So what I mean by that is it's hard to say. How can you say that springs toward to something? We've had 30 different winners. So obviously the previous 30, it didn't lead to anything because they didn't win another one after that. But that to me is the sign I look for, that who can do it 2 consecutive weeks or 3 consecutive weeks in this case. So I'm looking for that. Unfortunately, what typically happens is the players that do really well in Indian Wells often flame out early, partly for many reasons, but the obvious reasons being fatigue and just a letdown after a big win. So I think that is the problem. And again, you see players that are super motivated and they train. When you lose, you are going to go out and work on what made you lose. And so all those players in Indian Wells that lost early, they had that extra week, 5 days, whenever you lost, to get out there and practice those things and regain your confidence. Whereas you don't have that. If you go to the finals, you get 3-4 days off. You don't have that option to go and work on anything. You're just basically got to keep doing what you're doing. So that's another obvious reason that you don't see many repeat performances. Now I would almost be surprised when Nadal plays. I would not be surprised if Federer goes deep, because he always does. And then, like I said, I predict Djokovic to go, all the way. So we'll have a lot to talk about next week. I think having Coach back, he will share with us all his spring break shenanigans that he's partaking in. And I really want to get on him about what he thinks about my theory about just American tennis being completely, in the toilet. We've talked about that numerous times in terms of USTA and the governing bodies and the training. But this, to me, is totally something that's got to be addressed in terms of an American tournament with players not going deep. So I think that I want to hear his take on that. I want to see what, if he thinks we could turn around. I want to see what he thinks we need to turn around. And most of all, I want to see who he thinks can turn around, because I just don't see it. If I list all the up-and-coming players that I've seen and heard great things about, none of them are American. And so that's the conundrum I'm in right now. Is I want to root for Americans. I want to see Americans. I want to like Americans, and they're not giving me that option. So that'll be the topic for next week, and I will get on him to give us the solution to all things tennis, as he always does. So as always, you guys can check us out online. I'm not going to give you all the details. I'll leave that to Coach. But feel free to go to tennisrevolutionpodcast.com. You go to Twitter at tennisrevpod or tennisrevolutionpod. And until next time, thanks for joining the revolution.